The battle on the plain of Marathon in September 490 BCE between Greeks and the invading forces of Persian king Darius I, r. 522–486 BCE, was a victory that would go down in folklore as the moment the Greek city-states showed the world their courage and excellence and won their liberty. Although in reality the battle only delayed the Persians in their imperialistic ambitions, and greater battles would follow, Marathon was the first time that mighty Persian Achaemenid Empire had been shown beatable, and the battle would be represented in Greek art, literature, sculpture, architecture, and pottery, as a crucial and defining moment in the history of Greece. The Persian Empire. Persia, under the rule of Darius I, was already expanding into mainland Europe and had subjugated Ionia, Thrace, and Macedonia by the beginning of the 5th century BCE. Next in King Darius' sights were Athens and the rest of Greece. Just why Greece was coveted by Persia is unclear. Wealth and resources seem an unlikely motive. Other more plausible suggestions include the need to increase the prestige of the king at home, or to quell once and for all a collection of potentially troublesome rebel states on the western border of the empire. The Ionian Rebellion, the symbolic offering of earth and water in submission to the Persian satrap in 508 BCE, and the attack by Athens and Eretria on the city of Sardis in 499 BCE had not been forgotten either. The invaders would meet their match in 490 BCE when the Greek forces led by Athens gathered at the plain of Marathon. Whatever the exact motives, in 491 BCE Darius once again sent envoys to call for the Greeks' submission to Persian rule. The Greeks sent a no-nonsense reply by executing the envoys, and Athens and Sparta promised to form an alliance for the defense of Greece. Darius' response to this diplomatic outrage was to launch a naval force of 600 ships and 25,000 men to attack the Cyclades and Euboea, leaving the Persians just one step away from the rest of Greece. However, the invaders would meet their match in 490 BCE when the Greek forces led by Athens gathered at the plain of Marathon to defend their country from foreign subjugation. The Persian army. Overall command of the Persian army was in the hands of Datis, as Darius did not lead the invasion in person. Second in command was Artaphernes, Darius' nephew, who perhaps led the Persian cavalry. The total strength of the Persian army is unclear, but judging by the number of ships there may have been some 90,000 men. The actual number of fighting men may have been 2 Bavarabam units or 20,000 to 25,000 men. Most of these were archers, with perhaps another 2,000 strong cavalry force. The Persian army actually came from various states across the empire, but the Persians and Sakai were acknowledged as the best fighting units. Strategic and tactical considerations. Persian infantry, probably immortals, shown in a frieze in Darius's palace, Susa in Persia, which is today Iran. From a strategic point of view, the Athenians had some disadvantages at Marathon. In order to face the Persians in battle, the Athenians had to summon all available hoplites. Even then they were still probably outnumbered at least 2 to 1. Furthermore, raising such a large army had denuded Athens of defenders, and thus any secondary attack in the Athenian rear would cut the army off from the city, and any direct attack on the city could not be defended against. Still further, defeat at Marathon would mean the complete defeat of Athens, since no other Athenian army existed. The Athenian strategy was therefore to keep the Persian army pinned down at Marathon, blocking both exits from the plain, and thus preventing themselves from being outmaneuvered. However, these disadvantages were balanced by some advantages. The Athenians initially had no need to seek battle, since they had managed to confine the Persians to the plain of Marathon. Furthermore, time worked in their favor, as every day brought the arrival of the Spartans closer. Having everything to lose by attacking, and much to gain by waiting, the Athenians remained on the defensive in the run-up to the battle. Tactically, hoplites were vulnerable to attacks by cavalry, and since the Persians had substantial numbers of cavalry, this made any offensive maneuver by the Athenians even more of a risk, and thus reinforced the defensive strategy of the Athenians. The Persian strategy, in contrast, was probably principally determined by tactical considerations. The Persian infantry was evidently lightly armored, and no match for hoplites in a head-on confrontation, as would be demonstrated at the later battles of Thermopylae and Plataea. Since the Athenians seemed to have taken up a strong defensive position at Marathon, the Persian hesitance was probably a reluctance to attack the Athenians head-on. The camp of the Athenians was located on a spur of Mount A.I.T next to the plain of Marathon. Remains of its fortifications are still visible. Whatever event eventually triggered the battle, it obviously altered the strategic or tactical balance sufficiently to induce the Athenians to attack the Persians. If the first theory is correct, see above, then the absence of cavalry removed the main Athenian tactical disadvantage, and the threat of being outflanked made it imperative to attack. But if the second theory is correct, then the Athenians were merely reacting to the Persians attacking them. Since the Persian force obviously contained a high proportion of missile troops, a static defensive position would have made little sense for the Athenians. The strength of the hoplite was in the melee, and the sooner that could be brought about, the better, from the Athenian point of view. If the second theory is correct, this raises the further question of why the Persians, having hesitated for several days, then attacked. There may have been several strategic reasons for this. Perhaps they were aware, or suspected, that the Athenians were expecting reinforcements. Alternatively, they may have felt the need to force some kind of victory. They could hardly remain at Marathon indefinitely. Battle. First phase, the two armies formed their lines. First phase. The distance between the two armies at the point of battle had narrowed to a distance not less than 8 stadia, or about 1,500 meters. Miltiades ordered the two tribes forming the center of the Greek formation, the Leontis tribe led by Themistocles and the Antiochus tribe led by Aristides, to be arranged in the depth of 4 ranks, while the rest of the tribes at their flanks were in ranks of 8. Some modern commentators have suggested this was a deliberate ploy to encourage a double envelopment of the Persian center. However, this suggests a level of training that the Greeks are thought not to have possessed. 84. There is little evidence for any such tactical thinking in Greek battles until Electra in 371 BC. It is therefore possible that this arrangement was made, perhaps at the last moment, so that the Athenian line was as long as the Persian line, and would not therefore be outflanked. Second phase, the Greeks attack and the lines make contact. Second phase. When the Athenian line was ready, according to one source, the simple signal to advance was given by Miltiades, at them. Herodotus implies the Athenians ran the whole distance to the Persian lines, a feat under the weight of hoplite armory generally thought to be physically impossible. More likely, they marched until they reached the limit of the archers' effectiveness, the beaten zone, roughly 200 meters, and then broke into a run towards their enemy. Another possibility is that they ran up to the 200-meter mark in broken ranks, and then reformed for the march into battle from there. Herodotus suggests that this was the first time a Greek army ran into battle in this way. This was probably because it was the first time that a Greek army had faced an enemy composed primarily of missile troops. All this was evidently much to the surprise of the Persians. In their minds they charged the Athenians with madness which must be fatal, seeing that they were few and yet were pressing forwards at a run, having neither cavalry nor archers. Indeed, based on their previous experience of the Greeks, the Persians might be excused for this. Herodotus tells us that the Athenians at Marathon were first to endure looking at Median dress and men wearing it, for up until then just hearing the name of the Medes caused the Hellenes to panic. Passing through the hail of arrows launched by the Persian army, protected for the most part by their armor, the Greek line finally made contact with the enemy army. Third phase, the Greek center is pushed back. Third phase. Fourth phase, the Persian wings collapse. Fourth phase. The Athenian wings quickly routed the inferior Persian levies on the flanks, before turning inwards to surround the Persian center, which had been more successful against the thin Greek center. Fifth phase, the Persians are routed and retreat to their ships. Fifth phase. The battle ended when the Persian center then broke in panic towards their ships, pursued by the Greeks. Some, unaware of the local terrain, ran towards the swamps where unknown numbers drowned. The Athenians pursued the Persians back to their ships, and managed to capture 7 ships, though the majority were able to launch successfully. Herodotus recounts the story that Synedrus, brother of the playwright Aeschylus, who was also among the fighters, charged into the sea, grabbed one Persian trireme, and started pulling it towards shore. A member of the crew saw him, cut off his hand, and Synedrus died. Herodotus records that 6,400 Persian bodies were counted on the battlefield, and it is unknown how many more perished in the swamps. He also reported that the Athenians lost 192 men and the Plataeans 11. Among the dead were the war archon Callimachus and the general Stesilaus. The Greek army. The Greeks were led by either the Athenian polemarch Callimachus, also spelt Callimachus, or Miltiades, who had actually fought under Darius in the latter's campaign in Scythia and so had valuable military intelligence of Persian warfare. The 1,000 Plataeans were commanded by Orestes, and the Athenians fielded some 9,000 hoplites. The total force is estimated between 10,000 and 20,000, but was probably nearer the lower figure. Hoplites v. archers. The Persians could field superior numbers and their reputation was formidable. The two opposing armies were essentially representative of the two approaches to classical warfare. The Persians favored long-range assault using archers followed up with a cavalry charge, whilst Greek warfare favored heavily armored hoplites, arranged in a densely packed formation called a phalanx, with each man carrying a heavy round bronze shield and fighting at close quarters using spears and swords. The Persian infantry carried a lightweight, often rectangular, wicker shield, spara, and were armed with a long dagger or curved sword, topis, a short spear, and composite bow. Typically, those with shields, sparabarai, formed a defensive barrier whilst from behind the archers fired their arrows. The Persian forces also included a couple of 1,000-strong units, Hazarban, of elite spear-bearers, Aristobura. They had lighter armor than the hoplite, usually wearing a tunic, with perhaps bronze scales attached or a leather cuirass for some, colorfully patterned trousers, boots, and a soft hood. The Persian cavalry were armed as the foot soldiers, with a bow and an additional 2 javelins for throwing and thrusting. Cavalry, usually operating on the flanks of the main battle, were used to mop up opposing infantry put in disarray after they had been subjected to repeated salvos from the archers. Although the Persian tactic of rapidly firing vast numbers of arrows into the enemy must have been an awesome sight, the lightness of the arrows meant that they were largely ineffective against the bronze-armored hoplites. At close quarters, the longer spears, heavier swords, better armor, and rigid discipline of the phalanx formation meant that the Greek hoplites would have all of the advantages, but the Persians could field superior numbers and their reputation was formidable. Opening positions. The Persian force first landed at Karystos and then Eretria in northern Euboea, sacking both cities before moving across the strait to the eastern end of the Bay of Marathon on the 1st and 2nd of September. Marathon was chosen as a suitable landing point for the Persians because it provided ideal terrain for the cavalry units. Indeed, the very name Marathon may derive from the wild fennel, Marathos, which still grows on this exceptionally fertile plain. In addition, the site also had a nearby lake offering a plentiful supply of water for both men and horses. The advantages of the site are probably why Pisistratus also chose the spot to land circa 546 BCE on his way to establishing himself as tyrant of Athens. Here then, in the shelter of the Kynoshura Peninsula, the Persians set up camp. When the Greeks discovered the invasion point, there was some discussion amongst the Athenian strategoi or generals whether to stay or meet the invaders, but the latter was the option decided upon, and on arrival at Marathon on the 3rd or 4th of September, they set up camp near the sanctuary of Hercules at the western end of the bay, to be shortly joined by the Plataeans. The Spartans, celebrated as the finest fighters in Greece, were unfortunately delayed in their mobilization because they were involved in the sacred Carnia festival and may well have been preoccupied with a local revolt by the Messenians. In fact, the Spartans would miss the battle by a day. Greek phalanx. The details of the battle, as with most early 5th century BCE battles, are sketchy and contradictory between ancient sources. However, on the 11th of September, it seems that the Greeks drew up their battle lines in the center of the bay whilst the Persians had embarked only half of their infantry. Forming a front 8 men deep, the Greeks lengthened their lines to match the Persians and thinned out their center group to 4 men deep. The Plataeans were positioned on the right flank whilst the Athenians were in the center and on the left. The best Persian and Sakai troops commanded from the center, perhaps as many as 10 men deep. This was a common Persian tactic, so the thinning of the Greek hoplites in the center may have been a deliberate tactic by Miltiades or Callimachus to allow the flanks to envelop the Persians as they made progress in the center. On the other hand, the Greeks could not afford a narrower front than the Persians, as this would allow them to get behind the Greek lines at the wings and render the phalanx formation hopelessly exposed to attack. The two lines of men, invaders and defenders, stretched 1,500 meters long, and they now stood just 1,500 meters apart. Battle. The Persian cavalry is mysteriously absent from the battle scene, and once again ancient sources and modern historians reach no consensus. It may have been that Datis could not use them to good effect because of the sporadic trees which dotted the plain, or that he had in fact sent them, or was planning to send them, with other troops towards Athens, either in an attempt to take the city while the Greeks were at Marathon, or perhaps their very absence was to tempt the Greek army to engage in battle before the Spartans arrived. According to tradition, 6,400 Persians were dead, for only 192 Greeks. Eventually, though, the infantry on both sides engaged in battle, moving towards each other and perhaps with the Greeks running the final 400 meters whilst undoubtedly under fire from the Persian archers. The two armies clashed. A lengthy and bloody struggle ensued, with eventually the center of the Persians, perhaps predictably, pushing the weakened Greek center back. However, both the right and left flank of the Greeks got the upper hand of the Persians, driving them back. The lines were, therefore, broken and a confused melee was the result. The Persians, now routed on the left and right, fled back to their ships, but to reach them they had to cross a wide marshy area. In the confused retreat, the Greek wings closed into the center and attacked both the Persian center and pursued the fleeing Persian flanks, inflicting heavy casualties. Fierce fighting continued around the Persian ships, and it was in this action that Callimachus was killed. The Greeks captured 7 ships of the enemy, but the rest of the fleet escaped with any Persians who had managed to climb aboard. The Greeks had won a great victory. According to tradition, 6,400 Persians were dead, for only 192 Greeks. The first figure is reasonably accurate, but the latter is likely a great underestimate for propaganda purposes. The Persians were not finished though, as Datis now sailed for Cape Sunio in an attempt to attack Athens whilst the Greek army was away. The Greeks may have been alerted to this development by a traitor's shield signal from Mount Pentelicos, which was, perhaps unfairly, accredited to the Alcmenidae clan. No doubt exhausted, the Greek army was, nevertheless, compelled to march back at the double to Athens to defend the city. Their arrival at night of the same day seems to have been enough to discourage the Persians anchored off Phaleron, and the fleet withdrew back to Asia. At this point, 2,000 Spartans finally arrived, but they were unnecessary, for victory was complete. The aftermath. Back at Marathon, the dead were cremated and buried at the site. An unusual step in the burial mound is still visible today, and a commemorative column trophy was erected, fragments of which are now in the Archaeological Museum of Marathon. Sacrifices were made in thanks to the gods, notably 500 goats to Artemis Agroterra, and each year thereafter, a sacrifice was performed at the site. A ritual continued for another 400 years. The Athenians set up a column and statue of Iris, or Nike, on their Acropolis in honor of Callimachus, and his role in the victory, and statues and war booty were dedicated at the great sanctuary of Delphi. The victory was also commemorated in Greek sculpture by the renowned sculptor Phidias, a bronze group at Delphi which included Apollo, Artemis, and Miltiades, and a colossal bronze Athena on the Athenian Acropolis. A temple to Artemis Euclea was built in Athens, and the battle was also the subject of the sculpture on the south side of the Temple of Athena Nike circa 425 to 400 BCE in Athens. The victory was a great morale booster for the Greeks, and all kinds of legends grew out of the events in September. Visions of the mythical Athenian hero Theseus during the battle and the intervention of Pan were just some of the stories which helped to explain how the Greeks had managed to defeat the mighty Persian army. Also, veterans of the battle carried a bull of Marathon, from the Hercules myth, device on their shield thereafter to proudly show their participation in this great victory. Despite the Greek euphoria at victory, however, Persian ambitions were not dampened by defeat at Marathon, for within a decade King Xerxes continued his predecessor Darius' vision, and in 480 BCE gathered a huge invasion force to attack Greece, this time via the pass at Thermopylae. In August 480 BCE, a small band of Greeks led by Spartan King Leonidas held the pass for 3 days, and at the same time, the Greek fleet managed to hold off the Persians at the naval battle of Artemision. Together, these battles bought Greece time and allowed for the victories to come, first at Salamis in September 480 BCE, where the Greek fleet maneuvered the Persians into shallow waters, and at Plataea in August 479 BCE, where the Greeks, fielding the largest hoplite army ever seen, won the battle which finally ended the Persian wars in Greece. The Marathon Race. One final legend of Marathon, and one which has carried its name up to the present day, is Herodotus' account of a long-distance messenger, Hemrodromos, named Phidippides. He was sent to enlist the help of the Spartans before the battle, and he ran to Sparta, first stopping at Athens, a total distance of 240 kilometers, a feat repeated by an athlete in 1983 CE. Later sources, starting with Plutarch in the 1st century CE, confuse this story with another messenger sent from Marathon after the battle to announce victory and warn of the Persian fleet's imminent arrival in Athens. In any case, it was from this second legend that a race, covering the same distance as the 42 kilometers between Marathon and Athens, was established in the first revival of the Olympic Games in 1896 CE to commemorate ancient Greek sporting ideals and the original games at Olympia. Fittingly, the first marathon race was won by a Greek, Spiridon Lou. Thanks for watching this video about the Battle of Marathon. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories from ancient history.